Hi there, Meg here, and I am your Monday substitute host here on the Pagan Perspective. So this week's topic comes from Valariel, who asks, what are fairies? I will just read the message here because there's quite a bit in it. So this person says, thank you for all your great informative videos. May I ask, in your experience or opinion, what are fairies? Spirits of nature, elementals, genus locii, thoughtforms, gods, taking into account the Tuatha de Dannan, a race living parallel to us in another dimension. It seems to be such a broad term. Thanks. So I thought I'd go through this kind of bit by bit, working backwards with the question to get to my answer in the end. And I figured I'd start with the terminology. I wrote down quite a bit of my thoughts and notes and things, so please bear with me if I'm looking at it. I just really want this information to come across as clearly as possible, and seeing how things get really, scrambled up in my head and I tend to digress and get off topic a little bit. I really wanted to have something to go by this time. So here we go. So in the terminology, usually nowadays in modern languages, we tend to broaden the term of fairy just meaning any magical creature with a sort of human appearance. And they're usually associated with trickery. However, there are some areas too in folklore and mythology where fairies have sort of been mixed in with what others would call the wee folk. So anything that's like gnome or gremlins, oh god, goblins, or that sort of thing. I think for this topic alone, I'm going to stick with just the idea of a magical creature outside of the human race itself. That said, noted, the French word for fairy is fae, and it actually has its origins to meaning a woman with knowledge, with magical knowledge, and who knows the value of words, stones, and herbs. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well. The virtue of stones and words and herbs. And I thought that was kind of interesting how that idea changed into smaller people with wings. I think, how that came along, and I guess one would have to sort of read the French folklore to try to follow that. But there's so much folklore in France because it was quite the center part. It was quite the melting pot of the Celtic nations and all these other pagan and non-pagan cultures coming in to meet. So there's quite a bit to go there. But anywho, once again, I digress. Let me get back to my notes and move from there. So I'm going to work backwards from the question, sort of answer each part, explaining, what I know behind it. And then in conclusion, I will give my answer regarding what I think fairies are or are not. So are they from another dimension? This made me think of the Hindu belief in the Deva, or Diva, some people pronounce it. The Dei, I'm spelling it in French for you, I'm so sorry. The D-E-V-A. And they're sort of the spirits that guide the natural process of things, that keep, that oversee and influence ecology. And you need your third eye to see them. So in that sense, the fairy can come from another dimension if you follow the Hindu way of seeing them. Some say they could be spirits of the dead or have an unfinished life. For me, that is completely separate from fairies. I think fairies are a very alive and living being, whereas the spirits of the dead, or sort of the unliving or the unfinished life, for me that's more on the ghost end of things, and that's a completely different realm in itself. So yeah, moving on. Gods and goddesses with the reference to the Tuatha de Dannan, sorry. And so in some folklore, they sort of it's sort of the old gods and goddesses that sort of had been demoted into just being plain old fairies. And if in like nymphs and tree spirits, that sort of thing, they were sort of washed away by Christianity and just became mere fairies, if you will, and no longer gods and goddesses. So that makes sense in a way. And what was I going to say? So for the Tuatha De Dannan, it's the Irish supernaturally gifted race, if you will. And from what I understand is that they were the pre-Christian gods and goddesses and had become these just mere fairies. And so they still had their role, they still had their play in the Irish culture, but they weren't given as much emphasis of being so powerful or something that one needs to worship, so on and so forth, because they now had Christianity. So, however, again, I'm not an expert on the Irish culture, and so one would have to look more into that. In Christianity, fairies are seen as just fallen angels or demons, and so fallen angels were not godly enough to stay in heaven, but they weren't evil enough to go to hell either, so they're left on earth and they're fairies. They're, well, fallen angels and demons. In the thought form, asking if they're thought forms, for me that's sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Like archetypes sort of thing, or so fairies would equal there is this one set of beliefs where there's a place, I think I noted it, in Findhorn, Scotland. There's a Findhorn Trust in Scotland, sorry, and they sort of give spiritual guidance and so on and so forth. I don't really know too well what they do or don't do, but I just remember reading once a reference where they talked about fairies being a spiritual intelligences behind this, the spiritual intelligence behind species, and sort of a collective soul, if you will. And I thought this was interesting in the thought form itself of having this sort of collective soul, and that is the fae, that is the fairy. And again, why not? It's quite an interesting concept. I think I would have to look really much deeper into it to get around it, but they're basically just saying the fairies are just the archetypes of that collective soul that we all share. That's collective soul. And we are that magic that can make things happen. So I thought that was very nice. That was a nice idea. So for that, as a thought form, it's nice. As a genus locii, which is a protective spirit of a place. So I do love the idea, sort of, I think I kind of have it in the back of my head that, you know, there are house elves, and I always sort of like this little idea of these little house elves going around doing their little thing while we sleep or whatnot. And I don't know why, it sounds kind of creepy in a way, but for me it's kind of reassuring. So it's kind of weird, but I just love it. I love that idea, especially come Christmas and we bring the tree in the house, and I'm like, yeah, now the elves are going to be happy and they'll have a little tree that they can hang out in and be cozy in and stuff. So I do love that idea of having a genus locii. And then they asked about the spirits of nature or elementals. So for me, the difference between the two, spirits of nature are, their function is to provide a link between the earth and the cosmos, if you will. And whereas elementals are magical entities who personify a particular force of nature, and then they have the power over these forces, if you will. So it's not exactly the same, but kind of is the same, if that makes any sense. And so this also goes back to the Deva in the Hindu thought that that they oversee the ecology of everything. So one spirit, one fairy can come in the form of fire or in water, so the elementals, as you can understand it, or they come in their own form, whether it be a little person with wings or just a spray of dust or something like that, and do their function, whether it's to put the dew on the leaves or whether it's to change the color of the leaves, or you get the idea. So I do like that too. And then I wanted to go a bit more into it. I also found in my research that the fairy folk can also be thought of as memories that we have of a prehistoric race. And in that, there's a the Crow tribe in the mountains of Montana and Wyoming, who believe that they have fairy rings, and that strange happenings happen within these rings, and they believe it to be fairy people, but they look at them as being little people. They don't have wings or anything. They're just like you and I, except they're tiny, and they have some sort of magical power over not only us, but things of nature and whatnot. And there's also have been found in some digs in the US, there have been found some pygmy races as well. And you can get quite a bit of information on that if you do your research. And so I really encourage you to do your own research. Don't just listen to one person, believe it, and go with it for the rest of your life. You do your own research and think about it yourself, and choose, really intelligently choose what's right or wrong for you. But yeah, so some pygmy races. So this could all just be sort of memories, in the sense that the race had been killed off by humans. So the fairies, they had their wooden, stone, and bone tools or weapons, whereas the humans had iron. And so that's why maybe one of the tools used to ward off fairies is iron. There are a lot of Celtic nations who have lore of a race of a diminutive people driven into hiding by invading humans. So they also believe them to be ancestors or spirits of nature or gods and whatnot. I can't pronounce it, I noted it, but in the Celtic lore, you have the AOS, next word, SI with an accent. I'm very terrible at pronouncing the Celtic names, so I'm very sorry. I'm not even going to attempt that one. But and there they give a little bit more detail about these races and how humans sort of driven them into hiding. They don't want to just hide because they have magic. No, they're hiding because they're afraid of us. We had done harm to them in the past. And so yeah, so that's that. So to recap, sort of everything all together, I would have to say, for me, what sounds the most plausible, the most possible, in a sense, is for me, when I think fairies, I think spirits of nature and elementals, first and foremost, and along with the genus locii, and tied in with it, because I think they live along with us just as much as we live along with them, in a sense, one way or other. I like this idea of Deva, and I think it makes sense, this idea where you can't see them unless you have your third eye opened, and you're open enough. You have to open yourself up to see this other dimension. Yeah, and this idea of it being a memory of a past race is absolutely possible. It's absolutely possible. So it just makes sense. So for me, with the exception of the spirits of the dead being, or just having unfinished life and whatnot, I absolutely don't think that's the answer. But all the other ones, I would say that the answer is all the above in that sense. I think anything's possible, and I don't know anything for sure. I know what I feel in my heart, and for me, fairies are spirits of nature, elementals, that sort of thing. And so to recap, the world over has their wee folk. So there's something in that. In a sense, you go anywhere in the world and they have their fairy. Whether they actually exist in one form or another, or whether they are just a figment of our imagination, which is a form of existence in itself, I believe. Either way, I wouldn't want to live in a world without them. And if life has taught me anything, it's that anything is possible. So I believe in fairies. There we have it. I will leave it at that. Thank you if you've been listening this far. And I will see you next week with the next question. In the month of August, it's 2 weeks of subs week. And yeah, so until then, I wish you all a safe journey.